to you guys about. I heard a little bit from Satya. She actually took me out to see the space that you guys are working with, and some of the plans that you have as far as an orchard and a bee area as well. So what are you guys envisioning for the garden, and that can be as far as what plants you want to put in there, but also just the future of it, maintenance, and that type of thing. Everybody, everyone chime in.
What we envision for the garden is pretty much a three-phase for now activity, where we will be providing plots, individual plots, so that we can teach our members, and not just the members of the church, but members of the community, how to grow their own food. We will also have a children's garden with the goal of getting children outside, away from the laptops, away from all of the technology, just to be children, to learn how to play again. And then the other section of the garden will actually support our food bank that already provides food for families, about 300 plus families per week. And we not only provide enough food for a day, we give them enough food to last them from Sunday to Sunday. So the goal is to actually supplement the food that we already provide with fresh organic produce, as well as beautiful flowers for their table. So that's pretty much in a nutshell, but we do have visions that go way beyond that, things such as an amphitheater where the children can do their plays outside rather than being in the building, as well as an outdoor kitchen where we can actually harvest our food, take it straight to the kitchen, and conduct classes on how to eat nutritional food. Anybody else got any more input?
So in addition to that, supplying for the community that are facing food insecurities, we are going to have chickens. So we will have laying hens. That way the children and the community can see how we're raising a sustainable food source with the organic and the chicken, so that they'll know that they're getting nutrition all around. So that is another thing that is very dear to my heart, the chickens. Nevertheless.
Oh, yeah.
And then I think we're gonna have a pergola where that area can actually be used for meetings, teas, weddings, and things of that nature. So the way that the garden is going to be set up, it is really going to look like, not Neverland, but the Garden of Eden. Because we're going to have the orchards, and we're going to have all the other vegetables and things that bloom, flowers, and those smells will attract, our pollinators, which will give us the best return on our plants. So it's going to be really, really nice. It's going to be something that you can walk through, relax in, and just get used to being around the food. Normally they say that through osmosis it sinks in. Well, we want you to come and have that experience so that you can say, you know what, maybe I should change my diet a little bit at a time. So hopefully we'll rub off on the community to want them to think about body, mind, and spirit all together. And the wholeness of that wellness is what we're looking to accomplish.
Oh, that's awesome.
And what about bees?
Bee land.
Oh, the bees.
I told her about bee land.
So yeah, the pollinators, they're going to be important for, of course, our plants. But then we do have a professional beekeeper and his wife that will come and hopefully show us the ropes of how to harvest the honey, so that it can be another item that either we can give to the community or sell to for the upkeep of the garden itself. So yeah, we don't want to forget our pollinators that are going to do their jobs naturally outside of us doing, our job by nurture. So
Yeah, we definitely need them to have a holistic experience. That's great. Yeah, and planting those perennials that attract those pollinators. I mean, there's so many native Colorado plants that are perfect for that. The hummingbirds and our butterflies and our native bees, in addition to the honeybees. We have, I think, over 70 native bees just to Colorado. So 70, I say 7. It's still early. Well, that's great. No, it sounds like you guys have a lot of really awesome plans. I mean, a lot of what we do ties in, it's education, and we're all about behavior change and how people look at their landscapes and their water. So, veggie gardens are just as much a part of that as well, and getting folks normalized to fresh fruits and fresh vegetables and having those incorporated into their daily lives. So you guys sound like you've got some really awesome stuff going on. I wanted to take some notes too, just to get an idea so I can take it back to Diana and get you guys, kind of enveloped into our community garden network, because she's pretty active and there's a lot of other great gardens in the area too. I know you guys aren't specifically in Aurora, correct? You're Aurora adjacent, I guess. Okay.
With Arapahoe County or something like that, yeah.
Unincorporated. Okay, and that's what the trick was. I was like, there's weird little pockets all over the place. So, so I've got some cheat sheet notes to help me make sure I cover everything with you guys. Super informal. So if you want to ask questions, just like throw something at me or say, hold on a second, as I go through this, obviously. So basically, I'm just going to go over some different points of water conservation as it pertains to veggie gardens. They do tend to use more water sometimes in our landscape plants just because they need a little bit more attention, but there's still many ways that we can actually use water efficiently that are beneficial to the plants in the soil. So are you guys planning to have raised beds? Raised beds, okay.
Yes.
Which is great, because then you can have a little bit more control over the soil, as we have these lovely clay soils here for the most part, which are hard as rocks most of the time. So they make gardening in general very interesting, but it's nice that you guys are going to plan on those raised beds. That way you can have a little bit more influence. And that's what I wanted to start off talking about was soil amendments. So adding organic amendments to the soil is definitely a really great idea. There's a number of different ways you can go about this, compost being the most important. Plant-based compost is ideal. Do you guys have any thoughts or plans on having a compost area?
Yes.
Yeah?
We're actually working with Denver Urban Garden.
Oh, Doug, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're going to provide us with our compost.
Oh, so you're going to get it from them?
Well,
Or are
from
they
the
gonna-
company that
Okay.
they work through.
Okay.
And
Awesome.
they'll also help us with a 3-bin system for the
Great.
compost. And I'm hoping we can get that started immediately so
Yeah.
we can develop the proper habits in order to keep that going.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely compost. I mean, we compost. We have bins at work out in our garden that we do all year. So definitely a really great option for you guys, as you will have the amendment yourself or you're getting it from a good source. Compost. Hi.
Hey, how are you
Good
doing?
morning.
Welcome.
Just chatting a little bit about water conservation, so you haven't missed much. So yeah, plant-based, there's a number of different composts out there. Obviously, you can buy compost from a lot of the local nurseries. We've got several in the Denver area that are great. Paulino's, Tagawa's, Nick's in Aurora. There's several in North Glen and Thornton, depending on how far you want to go. But so that's those are good resources to get you started with the soil amendments if you don't have compost here right off the bat. But so plant-based and then animal waste manure-based. So chickens, you'll be able to have some good composting options on site with chicken waste. But the difference with plant and manure-based is salts. So our animal waste compost tends to have a lot higher levels of salts. So it's a great resource, but again, you are going to have to kind of mitigate and manage the salt levels. So when you're using aged manure, you typically only want to add about 1 inch for the year, and then cultivate that in about 6 to 8 inches deep in the soil. But you do want to just keep an eye on how the salts are going to affect the plants that you have. Some obviously have higher tolerance to it, but typically our plants don't want those high levels of salts in there to dry them out. Another topic with animal manure is that you typically want aged manure, and a lot of that will say that on the label, or if you have like a local farmer you can work with, they can definitely help you out as far as getting you the proper age, at least 4 months. If you do have fresh manure, it's great to add that in the fall, so that way it has all of fall and winter to age before you start planting in the spring. So it is another option that, especially if you have a great resource in the community that can provide you with that fresh manure, just to make sure that you're giving it time to age itself, so that way it doesn't actually draw a lot of the nutrients out from the plants in the soil. So. For the plant-based compost, you add about 2 to 3 inches a year, and then again cultivating that about 6 to 8 inches into the soil there. So really working that in, because obviously your soil is your foundation, right? It's going to affect the rooting depth of the plants. Obviously, we want to encourage more root depth for our plants. They can reach those pockets of air and water that may be a little bit further in the soil. But also having good soil structure, soil drainage, and then just overall reducing the compaction by adding those organic amendments is really going to help your plants be pretty robust. So starting with that really good foundation, and there's so much information about soils out there, whole books and resources, and you can get super nerdy with it, but definitely it sounds like since you guys already have that compost connection that you're off to a good start with that. So couple other things on compost. There's plenty of other amendments you can add. You want to stay away from fresh grass trimmings or wood chips. That tends to suck the nitrogen out of the soil, and the plants need the nitrogen to grow. So if you are wanting to incorporate grass clippings, as they are a great natural mulch, just make sure that they are dried out 2 to 3 weeks, so that way they are not going to take over that nitrogen source for your plants. Peat moss is sometimes thrown around as a compost. It's not ideal as it's a non-renewable resource. It's something that we're just constantly harvesting out of peat moss bogs, and those are depleting at a fast rate. So plenty other options out there for compost, but just sticking with your more organic substances instead of the peat moss. If you are composting too on site, obviously adding in dead plant material and grass clippings are great. You just want to make sure that any sort of resource going into your compost is weed free, so that way you're not helping germinate more of those seed heads or any of those weeds you don't want. And then also making sure that they're free of insecticides and herbicides, because none of that breaks down all the way. And if you're putting it in your compost, no matter if it's getting to 200 degrees, that stuff will just get composted in and then back to your plants. So not so fun eating plants full of herbicides and insecticides. So, which it sounds like that's not the way you guys want to go anyway. So, fertilizers. So this is kind of a topic that's really subjective because it depends on the health of your soil. So you can get soil tests from your local CSU extension offices. They do send it to the Fort Collins, and I believe it's about $30 to $35 for the samples. But that's really the best way to know if you need fertilizers. I mean, you can tell by like if it's greening, if maybe it's an iron thing, yellowing, if it's an iron issue or something like that. Knowing the genetic history or the problems that your plants face will obviously help you kind of identify if they're having some issues and needing a little extra kick. But the best kind of way to figure that out is to have your soil test. Or the CSU extension offices, the Master Gardener programs are really great. If you send in pictures of plants that are having issues, it can kind of help you self-diagnose a lot of that stuff too. So
we've had an extensive test done through the EPA.
Oh wow.
So, yeah,
okay.
Through Doug,
Oh, okay, that's fantastic.
We got the test results, and we're waiting for more information to come back.
Okay, and that's of the soil that you guys currently have.
Yes.
Which it's hard in an urban setting to even know like what kind of soil you have in a sense, because after development, just a lot of stuff ends up back in there, like bricks and wood chips and sand.
A lot of sand.
You guys have pockets of sand here. Okay, awesome. Yeah.
Sand actually is a split between sand and clay.
Yep. Okay.
So we know that we're on one side we're going to be doing raised boxes
Gotcha.
versus the in-ground beds
Mhm.
because of that reason.
Yeah, that's a good, and that severely affects obviously your irrigation, because drainage. I lived in Miami, Florida for several years, and sandy soil, just water goes through it so fast. So that's good. I'm planning to do the raised beds over in the clay area versus the sandy area. Okay. And that again is going to affect the type of organic or the content of the soil amendments too, adding that into clay and soil or sandy soils too, since clay just holds on to that water so much. Raised beds are definitely keychains, dogs. It is.
I know who
Furry friends, welcome.
You're probably not a child. I call animals. Yes, you're working in the field. You're like, oh, hi, kid.
Well, anyway, again with fertilizers too, you're wanting only to add those to mature plants. So seedlings and juvenile plants really don't need any of that extra fertilizer yet, as they're still growing. Hi.
Good morning, ladies.
So again, garden centers are another great resource. They have a lot of natural types of fertilizers too, if you're not looking to do too heavy on the chemicals, such as like worm castings, which you can also get as part of vermicomposting too, which is another really great composting resource. Yeah. As a fertilizer, they can be a great resource for that. And that is, again, if you need it, and it's a natural one, so. And then guano, which is our pet waste, compost tea, bone meal, fish emulsion, and a lot of those are carried at the local nurseries, and they can run you through all the ingredients that are in there, as they provide a lot of those for fertilizers. So
because we're going organic,
Mhm.
it's a lot of things that we are going to talk to the community before they come in and actually start gardening. I hate to say this term, but as a master gardener, we've gone through the process of what to use and what not to use. And so a lot of what you're talking about, we, the individuals that are master gardeners or people who have gardened in an organic setting, they know that things you want to use and what not to use.
Yeah.
So introducing our community to the things that we want to use versus the other things that we don't want to use, that is definitely on our list to do to ensure that we stay organic from the beginning all the way up to the whenever. So
Yeah, and that's a really great point too, because a lot of people, organic is just such a loosey-goosey word almost nowadays. Everything's organic, everything's not organic or natural, and there's a lot of greenwashing with labels out there in general. So that's a really great point, that the education piece is really important, as far as like where you're sourcing your plants from, your seeds from, but then also what's going in the ground, compost and fertilizer. So that's a really, really key point to it. So you guys don't need me here.
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Kind of going down into planning your garden. I don't know if you guys have gone into that, planning out the plots yet. Have you guys reached that? You're already there. Okay. Nice. Oh, that's awesome. Well, then some of this stuff probably you've already gone over, but obviously drought.
Good to hear it again.
Yeah, refreshers. Drought tolerant vegetables. So obviously, I'm sure you guys are wanting to do a very diverse planting of, and make sure you're covering a wide variety of plants. Some that are a little more drought tolerant are going to be tomatoes, squash, any of your peppers, especially your hot peppers, chard and eggplants. And those also will produce a large quantity. So if you're really trying to do an area that's more drought tolerant or water wise, while you're still getting quite a bit of fruit out of the vegetable, then those are definitely really great options in that area. Along with a lot of your herbs, chives, and things like that are very drought tolerant, and they're pretty hardy with our soils here too. So,
Morgan, do you have a list of the drought tolerant plants that
yeah, we can send that you guys too. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
That'd be great.
let me make a note of that before I forget. And Diana can actually go a little more specific into the varieties and the cultivars too, if there's certain ones that you're interested in versus others. So types, taste, and that type of thing. Because a lot of the vegetables, if they're not getting adequate water, if you don't know they're drought tolerant, will have a more sharp or spicy taste to them. So it's good to know which ones can deal with as little as possible versus your water heavy ones. So.
So, I also want to mention that our church membership is very diverse. We
Yeah.
have people from countries all around the world. So we're also looking forward to learning, like from you, Mr. Jim Bear, different gardening techniques.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's Diana, and with the network they have a lot of really culturally diverse community gardens. So she can definitely talk to you guys too about what some other ones are doing to kind of connect you on that level too, to see what works and what doesn't, and all this, the variety of vegetables from all over the world that are grown here. So
That's good to know.
yeah, definitely. There's quite a bit of cool stuff going on. So, but yeah, I will have her send over a list, and she can make any more recommendations as far as species and cultivars and stuff like that. Just off the top of my head, in our list here, some more that some veggies that need a little more space and water. So totally still fine to have, just accommodating for them. Broccoli, cauliflower, sweet corn. Obviously, that needs a little bit more. All of those need a little more space, but they're going to need a little more water than our peppers and squashes and stuff like that. So, accounting for that, they're not ideal in this climate, but they totally still grow. So, just accommodating for their needs is helpful. So, and then when are you guys planting, or have you?
June, hopefully.
June.
Right?
Okay.
For gardening.
June, we're
Yeah.
waiting to get our irrigation and
Okay.
some trenching done.
Gotcha.
And once
Okay.
that's done, then the compost will come in and we can go ahead and start
Go from
planting.
there. Okay.
Mhm.
Which is great, because then you should get them in before, obviously, our really hot times of the summer, July and August. But then also you could do a fall planting as well in September or late August too. So still plenty of time and lots of options left for that. And getting them established, and especially since you'll have irrigation too, so that's good, which we will talk about. So moving on to mulching, you guys don't have to worry about this part of it, but for future, waiting enough time to put mulch down so that way your soils heat up. So waiting until we are past. Well, it's kind of hard to know now when our snows are
All
going
this
to be.
cold weather.
When we're gonna actually get there, but getting your plants in and then waiting until sometimes they're about 6 inches tall, and adding that mulch to it then, since you know that they are able to grow in the soil and it's warmed up quite a bit, is a helpful tip. Depending on the style of the the box that you have, or the area, 3 to 4 inches of organic mulch is helpful. And we're not talking about your typical landscape wood chip mulch, as we talked about earlier in composting. It's the same for mulching. They'll deplete that nitrogen from the soil, so avoiding any type of wood mulch or fresh grass clippings for mulch is helpful. Now, there's plenty other, shredded newspaper is a great option. Straw, so if you do have any type of other connections with local farms are a great resource to get straw. Again, you just want to make sure that you're knowing if it's insecticide or herbicide free of any of those issues, or where they're sourcing the straw from. And they should be able to provide you with all those details. Or, any of the big box stores or nurseries will have straw, but it's kind of cool to connect with our local farmers on some of that stuff, especially since it's a great resource and kind of more of a sustainable approach. So yeah, newspaper, straw, the dried grass clippings are all great. Plastic, we don't necessarily recommend putting plastic. I know that there are those who do, so do what you will if you're wanting to add plastic over the top. As some do see it as a great resource to insulate the soil and the plant roots. So that's up to you guys, but it does tend to block oxygen and water getting down to the plant roots. And also a lot of these say that they decompose, but it's again not.
Now, what did you say about plastic? 'Cause I was thinking about that with my garden.
Yeah.
But I need to know what you
There, so I've heard both. I did go through the Master Gardener class too, and the presenter we had did advocate for using plastic over gardens, as it does help insulate and kind of keep most pests out of the garden. Obviously, you're not going to get some of those sneaky ones that burrow under and come up. But again, from our point of view, it doesn't really add anything positive. It can block water and soil or oxygen getting down to the soil. And it doesn't really decompose, as some of them do market. Now for, large farming operations, it definitely is more applicable to that. But for your just home garden, it can kind of block some of that natural movement of water and oxygen into the soil. So.
Okay.
I would imagine too, the moisture could cause it to develop different fungus and it's sort of like smothering it to the point where you're not going to get the air in order to keep those things from developing.
Yeah, that's a really great point. If you're doing drip irrigation, obviously that's ideal. But if if you've got some soaker hoses or some micro misters, those still have water projecting out, and so if you have that plastic over it, can kind of create that greenhouse effect where there's a lot of potential for things to grow and get trapped down there. So it does take a little more maintenance if you're going to use it to keep it cleaned and make sure that your irrigation's working properly, so you can avoid any of those issues. But if it's not something that you guys plan to do, then you're not missing much. Really getting a good mulch layer is going to really help insulate the soil and the plant roots in general. So, personal choice to some folks, but I just wanted to put that out there.
It was good that you told me.
Yeah.
Now I'm not going to do it.
If you've got a really good, just natural mulch that you can put on top, it's.
Well, over the years,
We're gonna
I have
use
been
straw.
putting.
Yeah, it's a great.
Now, straw bothers me because it grows in the garden once it's
Straw. Are you thinking straw or hay? 'Cause
Okay,
there's
I
a-
am not.
Okay.
Thank you for correcting.
You gotta be careful not to get hay. You want straw.
Straw.
Yes.
Yeah, which is
Now I'm
another.
gonna get straw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a great point of knowing where you're getting it from, so that way you know the difference and make sure there's no seed heads or anything in there
Yes,
for
see,
the.
that's what was bothering me. 'Cause I must have got straw.
Or hey.
Hey,
Mhm.
Yeah.
the reason I was putting the plastic on because out there in Green Valley we love the weeds,
Yeah.
and I don't want to work that hard.
Yeah, there's a way to work around the
Yeah.
weeds, and we'll talk about that before we actually start planting.
Good.
Yeah, but you're still gonna have to weed, there's just no getting around it until we put the mulch down. The mulch will help, but weeds are just part of that whole process.
Yeah, and weeds just a plant out of place.
That's
So
right.
you may not be in the place you want it to be, but it's still one of our lovely living creatures. So
Yes.
And that's another thing too with watering. Your weeds are hopefully going to be, you know, significantly less if you're watering to the specific needs of the vegetable or the plant that you're watering. And normally when you're seeing a lot of weeds, it's because you're overwatering. So that's a good sign to maybe adjust your schedule or your quantity of water too if you're starting to see quite a few of those pop up. And of course, nature is not going to bend to our hand, so you'll still see weeds, and you know, teenagers are great at pulling weeds. So if you children and teenagers, if they need something to do,
Tools are important too. If we have the right tools, weeding could be a piece of cake.
Yeah.
But we have to stay on top of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And cultivating that healthy soil will help kind of mitigate some of that stuff. But yeah, that's I unfortunately don't have the magic cure for weeds, and and no matter what chemical you use, which I know you guys aren't going to, but it's still, you know, that magic chemical sold at the nursery or Home Depot is not going to do it. So. So moving on to watering wisely. So I heard you mention trenching and irrigation. What are your irrigation plans for the garden?
Wow, I wish I had brought what Michael had.
Oh, but you don't have to go into it.
I think it's in the email. Did they say something about a drip somewhere?
I think we are going to have a drip system. We're doing something special for our orchards.
Yeah, which will.
I think we're gonna have an underground for them, I think.
Yeah, let me
Okay.
see if I can find.
So an actual like pop-up heads and things like that.
And then
Yes.
when they blow out the system,
Yeah.
if they need to come and water, they can hose it.
Hand water, yeah, definitely. Which is obviously, you know, super important for establishment, especially with orchards, you know, the first 2 growing seasons. Yeah.
So we will be using water hoses,
Oh, yeah.
to actually water our individual plots as well as the community plots.
Nice, okay.
So maybe, probably a lot of hand watering for the ones that, the drip doesn't get to.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Yeah, and those, I mean, an easy water conservation tip for the hand watering, just something with a nozzle that you can control it, obviously, will allow you to not waste as much unless it's just off a hose.
We're going to do extra training too on just how to water,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and when to water.
Yes. So for vegetable gardens, and this is like the different tract for me because I'm thinking landscape plants and like when to water those, and it's not too much different, but typically at night is ideal for vegetable gardens because that's when they're most actively growing. So luckily here we don't have 200% humidity like in Florida, and we can water at night without fungus and sort of mildews growing, so it's not much of an issue here. And ideally those late night early morning waterings are great because it's going to soak down to the root zone before the sun comes up and really evaporates a lot of that off, and before the wind picks up, which is another culprit of water waste that we deal with. So and I know, and I guess I don't know exactly unincorporated how that works with watering restrictions. If you guys, I don't think I'm not quite sure what you deal with. Like in Aurora, no watering between 10 and 6 is allowed, 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Because that's when we lose the most to evaporation and wind anyway. But hand watering is excluded from that. So that's just something to keep in mind since you'll have a number of different irrigation systems going, that hand watering is typically exempt from that. I don't think Denver has specific.
Yes, it does.
Do they have mandatory or is it just suggested?
See, now, like mine says, I can water on Monday, Wednesday,
Okay.
is that right?
Yes.
Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
Okay.
Where Saturday and Sunday, I'm sitting up there twiddling my thumbs. But
Mhm.
you said something I didn't know. I didn't know you could hand water in between.
So that's for ours, unless you have like an irrigation exemption for new sod or plantings or something like that. Any irrigation besides the hand watering, because that is more controlled. so that's another thing to keep in mind, although you guys, I highly doubt will be out there in the middle of the day watering anyway, but that is something to keep in mind. If it's overhead irrigation, then we don't allow that and you can get fined and et cetera, but you guys may not have to worry about that. I double check on your water source provider. If it is Denver Water, then check and see, or if it's ECCV or any of the other kind of local
What I know
ones.
about Denver, it's
Yeah.
from between 10 and 6,
Mhm.
no watering.
No watering.
It's suggested that you can only water your grass 3 times a week.
Okay.
No
Yeah.
matter what days you pick, only
Yeah.
3 days a week.
Okay, and that's similar to ours. It's sometimes it changes by the year. Like if theirs is mandatory, I'm not sure if they fine people. We do. If they don't follow our watering restrictions, we have the 3-day-a-week rule and then the 10 to 6. So which should be sufficient for any of our shrubs and perennials and that type of thing. It's the grass that really throws people off, which it's fine with 3 days a week anyway. So.
So we just need to check to see who we are regulated by.
Yeah, your water
Just to know,
provider,
right?
yeah, and just to
Even though
check.
we're in Denver and unincorporated.
Yeah.
How county we need to.
I would double check who you pay your water bill to just in case. If it is Denver Water, then it's exactly what you were talking about, and hand watering should still be exempt from that. I just wearing this label, so I know what I do. And I could probably do a quick Google search and find that out too. But since all of that stuff is picked up with irrigation season now, it's good to keep tabs on that too. And if anything changes, but since we've had such a wet winter, I think it should stay the same. So it sounds like you guys, since you'll have a different mix of irrigation systems, having some points on that, a controller. I'm assuming you guys will have, if you don't, you have an existing irrigation system
Yes,
on the
we do.
property.
Yes.
Are you going to be just building off of that, or is this going to be a separate system in general?
I believe our system is going to be separate,
Okay.
but that's something our facilities person
Sure.
take care of, but I can definitely double check.
Yeah, it's just because if it does have its own controller, that's where you'll be doing the scheduling. You can
Yeah,
get.
he mentioned something about timing and schedules
Mhm.
because of the garden hours and dates that
Yeah.
people usually have.
Yeah, and those can vary obviously too. There's all sorts of types of controllers out there. You can get fancy and get Wi-Fi controllers that use local weather data to adjust your schedule based on plant material. Now gardens are a little different in their water needs, but you can still schedule a lot of those controllers for garden plants. You can get rain sensors, which will shut the system off after a certain amount of rain has fallen. Soil moisture sensors shut controllers off based on the moisture content in the soil. So there's another kind of add-on sensors to help with managing the irrigation system. But if you guys are going to be more hands-on too, you can check the soil moisture yourself. A finger test is good enough, but 3 to 4 inches down if you're not feeling moisture, that's a pretty good sign to water, whether that's turning on the system or hand watering. And then again, I mentioned at night is a better time to water because you're missing that wind and that evaporation and also catching when those vegetables are growing. Now, something to keep in mind too with overhead irrigation, I'm not quite sure where you guys will have that, but it can have the potential to encourage more fungal diseases on the plants of the leaves, like powdery mildew, especially on squash and tomatoes. Tomatoes are like the diva of the garden, as you all probably know. So they are, very specific in what they want and what they can handle as far as, sun exposure and soil and wind and water. So keeping an eye on those areas where they'll have overhead irrigation, as that can cause a little bit more extra issues on some of those plants.
Okay. This says something about a sprinkler system, but I don't know what part it's at in one of the emails.
Yeah, and that's something as you guys can go into it. I mean, drip irrigation is ideal for veggie gardens as it can reduce, water waste by almost 50%, depending on the style and how you have it set up. Obviously, drip's going to get that water down to the root zone faster than an overhead irrigation system would, as there's just a lot of potential for runoff and waste in those pop-up sprays, especially for our veggie garden. So, because obviously you're wanting to encourage deep watering, as you want to get down to the root zone, which will help encourage stronger and deeper roots if you're watering deeper to get that saturation going. And I know a lot of the hose things that you can buy, the handles, technical term, and attachments can have low flow settings and things like that. It's sometimes a little bit harder to control with drip. As it comes out a lot slower, it's the application rate, but you do have to leave it on for longer periods of time to make sure it's getting that water out of the system and onto the plants, but can definitely over time use a lot of water as well. So a low flow setting on those hose attachments is nice too. That's out there these days. So and then I want to make sure I cover everything. Obviously grouping plants by their water needs. We do that in the landscape, same for the veggie garden. As we talked about earlier, there's drought tolerant and then more water heavy plants, so we want to group those together so we're not overwatering some or not watering others enough.
Do you guys have charts for that, or does Doug?
Yeah, I was going to say between Doug or Diana, there's probably definitely some charts that you can follow, or CSU probably has a ton as well, from what I can remember. And then planting, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but planting in blocks, not rows, so can create shade for roots and reduce evaporation. Having some of those leaves shade other plants, and using cover crops is another great resource, to prevent erosion from your soil, but also in those off seasons, growing ground covers and things helps keep that soil nutrient rich. And there's a lot that grow really easily too, so other great resources for when your plants aren't growing.
So can you talk a little bit more about blocks versus rows? So we're actually creating blocks rather than
and this is something that's still a little bit new to me. Instead of certain plants are going to be grown in rows, like corn is going to be a row crop, and some of your cauliflower and your broccoli varieties. But if you can grow in quadrants or blocks, like with obviously grouping with plants of water needs, it provides in that block more shelter for the roots, providing a little more insulation, but also reducing the amount of that water that's leaving the soil through evaporation. Because you're having them grouped like that. Obviously, you want to give them enough space to grow based on their mature sizes and heights, but doing in that way instead of the rows just provides a little more protection for the plants overall. And again, dependent on plant characteristics too. So
would you know which ones was better in the box than the rows?
Specifically, just kind of what I just briefly mentioned, like the corn and the broccoli and cauliflowers. But beyond that, I'll write that down for Diana.
Okay,
But I think that's all I had to cover just off the top of my head, but we can definitely just chat, and if you guys have any questions, obviously I'll try to answer to the best of my ability, but if not, I will make sure that all of this information gets back to Diana too, so.
Anybody got questions?
Music somewhere.
well, really find out what is good in a block, because usually when we grow things, with me, mine is everything in a row.
Yeah.
Me too.
Except for the cucumbers
Yeah.
and the tomatoes and and the peas,
Mm-hmm.
but everything else is in a row. So we don't. It's something.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's something I retained from my Master Gardener class, so I'll make sure that I follow up and get that.
So every other year, just to make my garden look a little
Mhm.
cute, I'll do a teepee, and I create those, the plants in circles.
Okay.
So I'm just thinking, the blocks, it makes sense,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't really visualize that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't think it's like a condensed block, right? I mean, it's enough that you're allowing, it's not going to look full when you first do it, but when they're at that mature stage.
So
and all
instead
the
of doing
plants
like
have.
a row of corn or a row of broccoli, something else, or a row of
Yeah.
tomatoes or whatever, so
Yeah.
you do a square of carrots, a square of cabbages, and
Yeah.
whatever, something like that.
Yeah, of course, based on like what can grow within.
Together.
Yeah.
I can see the blocks really help
Yeah.
when it comes to putting them together
Mhm.
according to how they grow and the water needs.
Yeah, and the spacing too. I mean, you guys have quite a bit of space, so I'm not sure that'll be such a problem for you right now. But as you continue to grow and factor in all those different plots and. Oh, thank you for not making me draw.
Here's a block style.
Rectangle.
Here's got a block style wet garden layout, also called close row or wide row plantings, increase yields 5-fold compared to the traditional row style garden layout, and 15-fold for the smaller kitchen garden varieties or kitchen garden vegetables. The compact design reduces weeding and is ideal for raised bed gardening. The basic
it's real good.
Right.
Say that again.
The 15-fold for the smaller kitchen garden vegetables. This compact design reduces weeding and is ideal for raised bed gardening. The basic technique used in closed row block planting is to eliminate unnecessary walkways by planting vegetables in a rectangular shaped beds or blocks instead of long single rows. For example, plants a block of carrots next to a block of beets, followed with a block of lettuce, and so forth down the bed area. Plant crops with an equal distance space between neighboring plants in both directions. For example, space a carrot patch on 3-inch by 3-inch centers. It may be easier to visualize this plant layout as running rows spaced 3 inches apart across the bed and thinning the carrots within the row to 3 inches. A 24-foot long traditional row of carrots will fit into a 3-foot by 2-foot bed. Design the planting beds to be 3 to 4 feet wide and any desired length. This width makes it easy to reach into the growing bed from walkways for planting, weeding, and harvesting. Limiting foot traffic to the established walkways between planting beds reduces soil compaction. Design walkways to 18 to 24 inches wide, and it goes on. I'll send you this.
Yeah,
but
so
if you can
I was
get
gonna say
some
I
more
just
info.
pulled that up as a CSU extension,
Yeah.
the map for my master gardener class. I was like, oh, here's the sheet,
Yeah.
and it goes into density and actual layout here. It breaks down 5 rows onions, 6 by 6 inches, 3 rows leeks, 6 by 6. So it breaks down like what to mix in and how that would look, and the suggested spacing. So I'll just go ahead and, I know you just pulled it up, but I'll go ahead and shoot you the emails
That works.
on that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, so it breaks it down just a little more, but that's basically
We can put that on the website.
the square
And in the
block, and then it shows you here like what to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
so.
So we know that CSU will have members when our garden opens that will come and do
Oh,
talks and things
yeah.
of that nature, just like the Denver Urban Garden Master Gardeners.
Mhm.
We usually pair together
Oh,
and do
fantastic.
talks and about various things, troubleshooting garden areas and things of that nature. So yes, we can absolutely pick their brains of what they have,
Yeah.
their knowledge of what they can lend to us in regards to our troubleshooting issues.
Yeah.
Even with the community members' gardens at home will help. It will be effective for them to use those tips as well. So.
Yeah, and they're a great resource too for, I mean, all of them are gardeners essentially. So for seed exchanges and, seedlings and plant exchanges, it's a really other great just network to utilize for the knowledge, but also plant material itself. So, and that's where a lot of them in the class and that I've talked to have those connections with the farming community where they get the various manures and natural composes and amendments and stuff like that. So yeah, another great resource. But obviously the planting you guys can do can change every year and try different ones out and see what works for you guys too. So
Morgan,
Yes, ma'am.
you and or Diana willing to come back as we get a little further along?
Yeah.
Kind of
yeah,
repeat
definitely.
to us, what you've already discussed today?
Yes,
That would be great.
We'll need it for like our new actual gardeners once we get in. And
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that, and Diana does various events. I wanted to mention, I mentioned to Satya earlier that she's going to have another veggie garden class that's free to the community that will be early fall. She's already had one for this year, and only one was scheduled for some crazy reason. So she's going to get another one scheduled for the early fall too, which is still another great time to plant a lot of these plants, but she'll walk through a lot of this stuff in more detail as well. So, but I will definitely make it a point to put on here, and you guys can obviously just contact us when that time comes that you would like us to come back, and we can work that out too. Especially, I mean, obviously the planting stuff, but the irrigation stuff can be just a little overwhelming in general, especially when it's all finally in the ground and you have to actually keep it alive. So,
Thank you so much, Lauren.
yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for having me. Glad to make it today.